Imagine if exam revision was enjoyable, like for everyone. Imagine if it wasn't just enjoyable, but it was actually fun and pleasant and colorful enough for you that you'd be happy to do it in your spare time. Imagine if school gave you the option to make any schoolwork you liked as fun as that. School's quite an important part of our lives. We spend a great chunk of our early life there, many years. We develop a lot of our relationship with learning there, learning the way we see the world, how we interpret the world. We develop a lot about the image of ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world. And so it's always struck me in hindsight as a very important experience to get right, as it were. I was one of these people who always felt I was getting it wrong. You see, I was bad at school. And some of you may think when I say bad at school, you might think bad behavior, you might think bad attendance, bad exam results, bad at schoolwork. But I was and probably still am bad at school. And there's a reason why I've worded it like that, in that particular way, rather than giving you a specific example. Granted, I was a struggler. I found it very difficult to read information. I found it very difficult to absorb information and listen to information. I could read, but when I'd be reading, I'd often glaze over the words and no information would go in. It'd be the same as learning. I'd be trying to listen to the teacher and listening. I would try to keep up with what the teacher was saying and try to absorb the information as he or she was saying it, and just trying to do that at the same time as paying attention with the flow of the lecture was just really difficult. I would often lose concentration, and it would be very difficult to try and tune back into the lecture. Same with textbooks. I would often be on the wrong page, or I would misunderstand the questions or not understand the questions. I'd misinterpret a task I was given. And all these things sort of built up on each other and made schoolwork very difficult for me and very difficult to engage with. And I found it pretty boring. I found it very difficult. I couldn't find anything interesting, anything worth my time in doing it, even though I tried. I really did try to sort of turn the tables on it. There were subjects that I was good at. I was good at art. I was good at acting, like my acting classes. I was good at creative writing. Maybe the things you'd expect from someone who's not so good at the more school-like subjects. But when it came to the school-like subjects, I had a bad time with them. And I'm not just talking about maths and English literature. History, geography, chemistry, biology, physics, interesting subjects. Subjects that I take great fascination in now as an adult. But at the time, there was just nothing to connect me to that interest. Some of the pupils could, but nothing really there for me. And because it was difficult as well, it made me hard to actually crack the nut of it. It actually made it hard for me to, even consider myself getting the hang of it one day. So that is, so why did I say I'm bad at school? Why did I use that phrase? Well, there's two reasons in particular. And these two reasons actually had a big impact on my life, from there on out. And the first reason was that all the subjects that I was bad at were academic subjects. Now, when you think of the image of school, with whatever image that is, or if you just think of the word school or the word education as an objective form, I'd be very surprised if you thought art, if art was the first thing that came to mind, or acting, or anything like that. No, you'd probably think of things like words and numbers and scholarly things that lead you down the path of being a doctor or a lawyer, stereotypically, as many schools pride themselves on. But my point being that school very much was built on these academic subjects that I couldn't do very well. If you were to be good at those subjects meant to be good at school. In my class, if you were good at maths, you were automatically considered intelligent by default. If you're good at drawing cartoons, not so. But the second reason why I use this phrase is much more profound. All the information in these academic subjects was presented in the same way, in the same format. It wasn't the same as in art, where they'd sit you down and then they'd give you a picture to look at, or a picture to draw, or in acting classes where they get you to do an acting workshop, or some sort of energy motivating game. No, it was very different. In academic subjects, they got you to do everything in worksheets, in handouts, in textbooks, in lectures, in writing notes off the board. And these are things that very much rely on the ability to read well and write well and listen well. And if you're not good at those, you don't do well. If you're good at those or you're passable at those, you'll do well at school, or school will be okay, whether you find it interesting or not. For someone like me, I was doomed to be at the bottom of the class, and I got a reputation for that. And that's why I used the phrase bad at school. Now, beyond a little bit of a sting to my pride, is it really that big a deal? Well, when you're really bad at something and you're forced to do it, it often comes with its freebies, as it were. For example, if you're really bad at football, obviously if you're that bad, you probably wouldn't take part in it. But what if you're forced to play it? And it's not like a friendly kick around with your friends where you do everything on your own terms. They're taking the game seriously. You would be worried. You'd be worried about the ball coming to you. You'd be worried trying to get rid of it as soon as it came. You'd be worried about it going off in a different direction when you put your foot to it. You'd be worried about what your team would think about you. You'd be worried about being picked last in the team at the start of the game. There comes a lot of disappointment and a lot of inferiority. You associate with yourself with that. Same with if you consider yourself not a very good conversationalist. You're dragged to a party that you don't want to go to. And you're worrying about how am I going to sound interesting, or I hope people don't come and talk to me, or I hope they don't ask about what I do for a living, and you're looking at the clock to see when's an appropriate time to go home. And it's the same thing with school. There's a lot of self-disappointment. There's a lot of dreading into coming. There's not really much reward in coming in. I grew a reputation for being stupid among my school, my peers and even my friends. I felt stupid in the work I was doing because I couldn't do it. And I had a very negative relationship with schoolwork. It was not rewarding. So exams were the worst part, when I really had to try for exams, and despite the sweat, despite the tears, despite really trying to get that information in, nothing ever seemed to go in. And it made it, it was almost worse doing it for exams than it was in school. And I had my parents sort of neglecting their own work to try and help me with it. I had my friends try to help me with it, and still nothing would go. And I tried mind maps. They would become a mind mess. I would try dyslexic techniques that are supposed to improve your concentration, and that they didn't work at all. Why couldn't I do this? It's such a simple thing that school makes out as if it's second nature, and yet here I am sort of struggling to do the basic remembering of a couple of historical quotes, So when I got to my final exams in higher, I just thought, I was in the middle of my revision and I could just feel that familiar pain. So many words, so many political systems to understand, so many quotes to absorb, and I knew from my instincts by then that this was either going to be a fail or a very near pass, just the edge of a C or something. I just didn't think it was worth putting myself through that emotional trauma again. So what happened next was very revolutionary to my life. I thought, if I'm going to fail anyway, I might as well enjoy it, I took that seriously. I took the page of revision notes I was looking at, and I cut it into little chunks, which they recommend you do anyway, and I turned it into a comic strip. I like comics. I like reading comics. I love reading the Beano and Dandy, and I love making comics. So I just told all my revision information through a couple of pages of characters bantering the information back and forth, and I color-coded what was supposed to be revision material so that I knew what was to revise, and I left the character dialogue black and white. Weird thing happened. I could understand the information a lot better. I could read it a lot better. I could remember it a lot better. I now had a visual and a point of narrative to remember all the information by, and furthermore, each visual was distinct. It was easy to remember. Because I wanted to make this fun. I wanted to make this fun for myself. I wanted to make it something that I'd be happy to read in my spare time. And it made revision fun, weirdly. I made more of my modern studies revision notes like this, and it made me look forward to revising. It made me look forward to, preparing for my exam. And that was absolutely brain-numbing to me beforehand. As far as I was concerned, I was still going to fail this exam, fail it worse than ever. But at least I was doing it on my own terms, and at least I was doing what I loved and doing what I enjoyed. So, long story short, I got an A. That's the first A I ever got. Thanks, Mum. That's the first A that I ever got in any academic exam like that, and usually I'd be very lucky to scrape a B, And ironically, I got a C in art that year, but that's not important. The point is that this was such a victory that I it just made me realize that I could do it. I could do it just as well as the top person in my class. That grade was better than a lot of people in my class got for modern studies, and people that I considered a lot smarter than me, a lot more academic than me. So I could do it just as well as anyone else. And I was kicking myself. If I'd have figured this out sooner, it could have saved me from so much grief. I mean, I graduated from school and focused on my art, did 4 years in art school, and since recently I've come to making this revision technique of mine into a reality. They're called Deco Comics, and as you can see, they're very colorful, full of characters, full of diversity, and what I hope that comes across to you as is that looks like a comic. That looks like a comic made for entertainment. It does not seem like an educational piece, and that's what we want. That's exactly what we want, and that's exactly how it works. We tested this in the prototype stage on 5 different schools in Scotland. We used different age ranges, different learning types, including people with dyslexia and autism, and unanimously, everyone liked it. Everyone appreciated it. In the same way that they would appreciate a piece of music or a TV show, they loved this. And based on what their teachers thought of it, their teachers called it a fantastic resource. They really, really liked what they saw, and they based it on the children's feedback. But, it's not just a case, obviously children will enjoy pictures, whatever you give them, so how did we actually judge it was successful at its function? Well, we based it on 3 different criteria: engagement, digestibility, clarity. So engagement, how well they enjoyed it; digestibility, how well they retained the information; and clarity, how easy the information was to understand. And first of all, in terms of engagement, as I said before, they enjoyed it. They were demanding more, they were wanting it instead of their homework. They thought it was a really fun experience. We got a lot of exclamation marks in this. I think I taught them punctuation in this, but it went down really well. Secondly, digestibility. It retained a lot of information too. For example, like we gave the kids a comic to take home for a week. And we just said, read it as many times as you like, and we'll ask you questions when you come back for next week. The kids who'd read it once could answer some of the questions right, not all of them. The kids who'd read it 3 to 4 times could remember significantly more, and nearly full marks the whole time. Oh yeah, I see what you're laughing at. It's the guy in the bottom right. I taught them that too. But clarity as well. Well, we deliberately made a sort of a comic that was based on advanced higher biology information, information that was far too sophisticated for most kids of age 11 and 12 to understand. But we deliberately portrayed it in the same comic format. And 2 months after we had taken the comic away from them and they had no more there, their teacher asked a couple of them randomly what they'd learned from the comics. And they remembered what photosynthesis was, what chloroplasts were, what plant and animal cells were. They didn't understand them in the context of advanced higher biology, obviously, but they they remembered them in context to the comic and what was happening in the comic. It was a huge breakthrough for me. So why do these work? Well, first of all, the comic format itself is actually a very good communicator of revision or education. It divides everything into chunks, first of all, naturally, but also you can't have too much information. It forces you to be concise. If you have too many words in a comic panel, the reader gets turned off, so you can only have small amounts in it. Secondly, which goes in hand, it has to have a good visual in it. And since we put a lot of effort into making these entertaining visuals, this gives you and each one is different, that cements something in your mind. It gives you sort of checkpoints to remember all the information by. Thirdly, the humor and the storytelling. The storytelling gives you something to remember in it. But also just if you make it good, if you focus on making it good and actually funny and actually fun to look at, people will remember, in the same way if you hear a song a few times or if you watch a TV show a few times, you can remember several bits of it. The comic works in no exception. Another good element is color. The color is very engaging, very eye-catching. It motivates the kids right away. Color coding the information parts makes it easier for the kids to understand and go through it. We also use a dyslexic-friendly font to help anyone who will even struggle with just the small amounts of text. It's there to make it easier for people with dyslexia. It's called Dyslexia Font. But the most important element, by a clear mile, and I cannot stress this enough, it was the same when I was at high school, and it's the same now, is entertainment. Entertainment, making it something worthwhile, something that you would happily do in your spare time. That is putting the horse before the cart. So many people try to make, so many products out there try to make education make products that are fun for kids to use, but they put education before entertainment. They try and make it look good on paper for the parents and the investors and such, and make sure it gets the lesson down, and then they decorate it up with art and a game element later. And no, we focus on making Deco Comics a good comic before we focus on education, because we want kids to see a comic first, and that's what opens their minds to it. That's what makes them enjoy it. Be bold enough to make it as fun a piece of material in its own right as possible, and it'll just make so much more sense to the reader. And also, what happens that way is that the education is fed through the funnel of the entertainment. All that's doing is the entertainment is communicating the information. So it doesn't diminish the education by putting entertainment in front and focusing on making it fun. I mean, that's ultimately what we look for in daily life in our spare time. You know, we look for things that can keep us entertained, that can inspire us, that can make us feel worthwhile, that we're engaging our time. And some kids in particular need an entertaining approach. You know, they learn how to play all these computer games. They didn't know how to play them at first. They had to learn it as they played along, but they did because it was an enjoyable experience. So education by entertainment, you know. It's sometimes easy to forget that, you know, although words are extremely important, we use them in all walks of life, and we use them in all our senses, we sometimes forget that it's our senses that came first. You know, we didn't come out of the womb with the ability to talk. We didn't say hi to the doctor. We didn't know any words either. We had to learn. We forget that words is a man-made skill. It's a human-made skill. It is something that you have to learn as you grow. But we saw the world and learned to interpret the world first through vision, touch, taste, movement, sound, and that's how we communicate with entertainment, you know. Even when we're playing football or something like that, you know, what is that without the movement? What is a good song without the tune and the rhythm and all these elements to it that require our senses, you know. So to round this up quickly, there are some big changes that are being made in our world all the time. You know, you see them in our science, renewable energy. For example, you see them in our technology with all these androids and apps. You see them in human rights. You know, in the last 100 years in particular have been extraordinary. But with all these changes that we embrace and that stay with us and they grow with us as we develop as a society, we often find that they're not completely new ways of thinking. But more that they are sort of things that made sense all the time, and we're only just getting around to it. You know, we feel that we're discovering them more than suddenly figuring them. You know, suddenly coming up with them. You know, human rights was always a good idea, for example. So, what if learning through, in terms of education, what if learning through comics isn't just a wacky gimmick for some learners? You know, what if it actually was quite a valid way of learning, always was, and just hasn't ever sort of been subscribed enough to or embraced enough as a concept, you know, the idea of visuals. What if using entertainment generally as a way of communicating information is a much more valid and much more wider sense of communication than we give it credit? You know, think of the top person of the math class and the bottom person of the math class could know everything about the same TV show or the same song. You know, it has a much wider audience. And what if, just maybe, what if learning is never boring, but how it is presented can be? Thank you. Thank you.